It is my pleasure to introduce to you today a very special woman, a woman who was prepared to step up and be counted for what she believed in, a woman who made history when she withdrew her support from her party over the issue of a nuclear-free New Zealand, precipitating a snap election in 1984. A global pioneer for women's rights, whose life has been dedicated to the promotion and protection of human rights around the world. Still counting, internationally celebrated Dr. Marilyn Waring, recently named on a list of 50 people who will change the world. This was the opening statement of an article in the New Zealand Listener, which covered a young woman who was barely out of her teens when she entered Parliament. A fellow backbencher at the time said she was a first MP to speak up on women's issues and carried the flag almost on her own. Since her election as the youngest woman in New Zealand Parliament at the age of 23, to be one of 1,000 women to be nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize, Marilyn's contribution to politics, economics, and feminism has been indefatigable. Marilyn has a PhD in political economics and an honorary doctorate from the Glasgow Caledonian University for her contribution to international feminism and female human rights. She is a professor of public policy at AUT University in Auckland and has held fellowships at both Harvard, Rutgers Universities USA, at Queen's University Canada, and at the Hawke Institute Australia, and was a visiting professor at Southwest Jiangtong University in China. In 2012, Marilyn worked with the United Nations Development Programme, writing 13 modules on the Gender and Economic Policy Management Initiative for Asia and Pacific. In this work, Marilyn included third gender persons. Her 1998 book, If Women Counted, persuaded the United Nations to redefine gross domestic product, inspiring new accounting methods in dozens of countries, and became the founding document of the discipline of feminist economics. More recently, she's been working in Myanmar to train members of Parliament in policy matters, economics and budgeting issues, as well as the environment and regulatory systems that should apply to investors in natural resources. Marilyn's feminist ideas are still resonating. When Turkish feminists had a chance to speak during a popular uprising in Istanbul last year, they used their time to show a Canadian film about the work of Marilyn's based on her 1998 book, Counting for Nothing. Over 25 years later, this book and its ideas still resonates. Marilyn has received numerous awards and accolades for her work and was even named as one of the leading cult figures of the 20th century by an Australian magazine. Nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize, awarded the Companion of New Zealand Order of Merit for services to women in economics, and Doctor of Letters from the Glasgow Caledonian University. Presented with the Amnesty International New Zealand Human Rights Award, and named on a list of 50 people who would change the world by a British edition of Wired magazine. This year, Zonta International invited Marilyn to become an honorary member, and we are really delighted that she's accepted this honour. In her life, she's tried to use the privileges and skills she has and the relative safety of her passport to unapologetically speak truth to power. She has had feminist friends who have disappeared, been imprisoned, and faced trumped-up charges. She has never had such threats and has therefore never been able to choose an easier path, while her friends have literally put their lives on the line. I'm sure you'll all agree she is a remarkable woman and has given much globally, especially to women. Please welcome the truly courageous, tenacious, innovating, and inspiring Dr. Marilyn Waring.
Morena, wahine noa. Good morning, you strong women. Kia ora tātou. Good morning to all the others. When I was 21, I became a political candidate, 22, I became a political candidate for the New Zealand Parliament. I was very aware that as much as I knew from my life's experience or my study, I had a lot to learn. My constituency understood this and began to pass me from branch to branch, introducing me to the realities of daily lives in the farming regions and to a host of different people who had stories to tell me about their lives. I embraced this new learning environment, one of rare privilege, and very different from the evidence-based book learning that had been my university experience. But I noticed a major difference between me and the vast majority of older men who served in our nation's parliament. I knew I didn't know much at all. I was astounded to realise a lot of them thought they knew everything, and nothing was going to change that. This was a period when there was very little data on or about women. We told each other's stories until the evidence about domestic violence and rape or pay inequity or our absence from so many places and positions was compelling. The men in my parliamentary caucus did not like this. It disturbed their stereotypes and prejudices. It made them very uncomfortable. They behaved as if I was making it all up. Even before I began my academic work, I have always been interested in how we know what we know. How do we know what we know? Who do we learn from, and what do we do with it? Do we see ourselves as curious inquirers all of our lives, or do we become lazy and think that the media and Wikipedia are reliable teachers? Are we even conscious of how differently people know what they know? Do we let fashionable assumptions fly by unchallenged? Have we been propagandized to believe only quantitative data is reliable? A notion many in power would like us all to embrace, as other truths about our lives and experiences are too complex to deal with. As a young parliamentarian, I was told stories of assumptions and discriminatory outcomes in a host of policies and the way they affected women. Principally, and most of all, because what women do around the world is of little economic value, except when they participate in the market. This was especially so in the South, where the most significant agricultural producers, women, worked as subsistence farmers, taking care of food security and nutrition. Because this production didn't flow through the market, it was invisible. But it wasn't just subsistence farming that fell into this category. The work that specifically doesn't count in the gross domestic product is as follows. The cleaning and maintenance of the dwelling occupied by the household, the preparation and serving of meals in the household, the care, training and instruction of children, the care of sick, old and infirm people, the transportation of members of households and their goods, and the cleaning, service and repair of household equipment. The rules originally stated specifically, before I embarrassed the United Nations Statistical Commission, that these activities which encourage the whole of the economy to function, and without which it would soon spiral to a halt, were, quote, of little or no importance, end quote. We share this with our ecosystem. When we mine, exploit, mill, drill, when we destroy habitats and ecosystems along the way, you may not know, this is really good for growth. So is sexual trafficking and slavery, trade in munitions, wars are fabulous for growth, underground economic activity, including narcotics and graft and corruption, along with destroying the ecosystem, this is all fabulous for growth. Because as long as there is a market transaction, whether legal or illegal, we should all celebrate, whatever the cause and the cost. The ignorance about what growth really measures now threatens our planet. The fifth assessment of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was published in September 2013. It is the work of 259 scientists from 39 countries who have to submit this work to detailed and open scrutiny before it is ever published. It is science's best assessment of where we are at. There are times when book learning is good for how we know what we know. And the panel's best guess is terrifying. Parts of our planet will become increasingly uninhabitable for hundreds of millions of people, either because of drought or floods. The weather will be more volatile, and no one will be untouched by the consequences. This is an inconvenient truth to the right-wing naysayers. It takes women leaders to speak the truth. Mary Robinson understands we need to mother our planet and remove the behaviours that make it and us more sickly. And the hard truth is we have to leave fossil fuels, coal, oil and gas in the ground, and we have to stop wasting energy. I hope nobody in here left the aircon on in their bedroom. This is mindless overconsumption. Lord Stern, who was previously the chief economist at the World Bank, hardly a raving liberal, there's always an opportunity for epiphanies, it's never too late, said that even if we were to stay at current levels, we will surpass the threshold of safety, that is a warming of 2 degrees centigrade, within the next 15 to 25 years. We women have to lead in taking care of our Mother Earth, and we have to speak truths. We have to be acquainted with evidence, not ideological garbage pushed by big, wealthy market players. Stern's report for Blair on climate change used a cost-benefit analysis to show that intervention now would be a much lesser burden on national budgets than delay. You don't need an economics degree to work this out. We women know this. A child is sickly. There's an early primary intervention. There's a return to health. Or, our child is sickly. We're too busy in our business and other work. It doesn't look too bad. It's inconvenient to take time out to investigate. We don't have the cash today. Nobody else seems to be taking their child to the doctor. There's a point in a few hours or days where the GP can't help, because now our child needs specialist care and hospitalisation, and the costs have escalated phenomenally. Women understand this. And we have to assist our Mother Earth in our advocacy and practice, because, like us, in our caring for our households and the planet, she is invisible. We also need to be pressing for change in intransigent and old assumptions. when crises call for change. Think about social protection alternatives on HIV and AIDS, where sometimes the outcomes are devastating. In Swaziland, HIV infection rates have been 45%. 78% of children are without both biological parents, 38% with a mother only, and 140,000 children have neither biological parents. Yes, the burden of care falls largely on female grandparents and community support systems, but 6% of households are headed by children. This raises a number of issues for policy interventions, many of which target or depend on the head of the household. But there's intransigence from adults in giving agency in making these benefits available to the children who are head of households, drawing a line which says that at 14, a full-time caregiver and head of a household family is a child and can't receive strategic inputs. But then one birthday she qualifies. This is crazy. This flies in the face of reality. What are we asking of these young women? Because their experience has taught them that they should put themselves and their brothers and their sisters and their neighbour children and cousins in a position where they will not be molested by adult males with HIV. They find that safety in remaining in a children's household. Why can't UNICEF and UNAIDS and the World Health Organization and donor agencies fully recognise children who are heads of households? They choose this situation because the alternative is horrendous. Such intransigence becomes a place for intervention by international NGOs who can see the madness in obstinacy in the face of this reality. NGOs like Zonta, whose work in fistula and domestic violence fills gaps where male-dominated parliaments refuse to contemplate or commit resources. Part of knowing what we know is having the boldness to speak the truth and to listen to those on the front line, even if they are 14 years old. We should not presume to know better than them. Presumption can also get in the way of curiosity. Have you caught yourself out at this sometimes? I like to think that I'm a well-read skeptic. I consider myself reasonably agnostic where propaganda is about. I'm curious about the world and extremely fussy about my sources for information. But in 2003, I flew to Havana from Toronto, taking an opportunity to be hosted by a friend working in Cuba for a Canadian multinational company. The immigration and customs folk at the airport in Havana did not stamp my passport. They don't stamp anyone's. This is very useful for the Cubans who visit family and live in the States, and it's very useful for US citizens who were not supposed to visit but did. The next flights in to Havana were coming from London and Paris and Cancun. There were no soldiers or guns at the airport, and I had expected them to be there. I've seen this in airports across the planet. And with all the hype about Cuba, where did that idea come from? On the first drive into the city from the airport, I noticed women standing at intersections and sort of out into the roadway along the edge, holding up their arms as if they were trying to hail vehicle occupants. It seemed to me that when they saw we two women, they dropped their arms. But my mind had already determined what this meant, influenced by stories from a book, Cuban Diaries. And I thought to myself, God, and it's only mid-morning. I remember thinking, I knew it was bad, but I had no idea it was this bad. I was shocked, stunned. In the days ahead, though, I observed that cars in Cuba had different coloured number plates, which identified whether they were driven by a tourist, a foreign national working in Cuba, they were a taxi, or a Cuban working for the Interior Ministry or military, and another number plate for government departments. If you're driving a departmental car, you have to fill it up with people travelling in your direction and let them off at a public transport or other convenient stop along your route. How eminently sensible. How dreadful of me to rush to conclusions. I thought about the selfish aversion to carpooling that many New Zealanders have, and how this Cuban policy, far from presenting a threat from strangers in your car, actually operates as a form of security, of people looking out for each other. But having prejudices and biases and leaping to conclusions are everybody's experience. We can't all know everything. But not everyone is constantly open to learn how wrong we were and to recognise that in ourselves. Let me give you another important illustration about what we know. I constantly tell my students that the experts in any matter are those who experience the phenomenon. I was at the World AIDS Conference in Mexico City, tens of thousands of us there. My keen interest in human rights led me to the presentation on disability and HIV. I went primarily because I wanted to lend support, because it was the first time such a panel had ever been assembled in the history of the conference, and because I had also discovered that not one of the many stages or platforms in the whole convention centre had disability access. The first speaker was a Kenyan woman in a wheelchair who chaired the South African Coalition on Disability and HIV and AIDS. She began, "You may wonder why there should be a panel like this and why it is outrageous it has taken so long for us to have a space. Above all, people with disabilities desire to be treated as normal. Sex is normal. We do not have the opportunities to be sexually active as often as others, and we are far more likely at short notice to accept any willing partner. This panel is long overdue because we are likely to have unsafe sex." It took my breath away. I had never got there before. It was obvious, really. But over the next 2 hours, there was much more in this panel of experts, those who live with a disability, and it had a profound effect on all of us present, and I doubt any of us will ever forget it. Women are extraordinary and profound teachers. We should never make assumptions about when and how this can happen. Let me conclude with a story about a visit I made to the Cordillera in the Philippines. I had travelled to Bontoc and there met one of the 2 barefoot doctors for 1 million people in this area. We then bumped along in a 4-wheel drive vehicle along a rough, beaten path for over an hour, and then climbed on foot for yet another hour to reach a few buildings and a doctor and a family the doctor wished to see. There were 3 generations of women there. The grandmother was uncomfortable with my presence. She had to be reassured I had not come to laugh. The doctor finished her work and we shared some tea. They wanted to know about these visitors, who they were and where they had come from. And then we asked if we might ask the grandmother a question. If she could have one wish in her life for herself and not for her daughter or grandchild, what would it be? I want to learn to read, she said. She told us that following the removal of Marcos, she had walked to Bontoc to cast her first ever vote in her election. One day, before she died, she wanted to go places further than Bontoc, and she wanted to learn to read so that she would know where she was going. What do we know and how do we know it? It's not in books. It's not in the computer. It's the accumulated wisdom of women. I've learned from a lot of women who you have also honoured. I met Helvi Sifila at the Commission on the Status of Women when it was still in Vienna. I've shared platforms with Margaret Schneider and with Nolene Hazer. Helen Caldecott played a very, very special role in New Zealand becoming nuclear free. We were together the night Chernobyl went up. She's an old friend. And Sylvia Cartwright has been a friend for almost 40 years. This is an extraordinary honour, and I thank you for the recognition of my life's work.